Hi guys, another video from Deep Dive Tuts, and in this video we are going to learn about the many-to-many Laravel relationship. I've got a little presentation here. So this is what we are going to achieve. We've already got a products model. We will need an attributes model, and we will also need an attribute values model. So for example, a t-shirt can have attributes color and size. Similarly, a shoe can have a same color and size and the same attribute values. So this is the product, t-shirt is the product, color and size is the attributes, and this red, green, blue, small, medium, large, these are attribute values. So we've already got the products model. So let's create the attributes model now. To create the new attributes model, we need to use PHP artisan command, PHP artisan make model attribute, and hyphen all. That's going to create all the necessary files that are needed. The next thing I will do is create the column in the attributes table. So let's go here, and I just want one column in there for now. That's going to be an attribute name, and I'm going to go and create some dummy attributes in the table. So I'm going to go to attribute factory and set the attribute name there, and I'm going to go as a word. And in this cds file in the database, I'm going to go here, I'm going to uncomment out this one because I don't want to create more products. So attribute factory create. I'll just copy this statement here, it's easier. So I'm going to create 10 attributes, and I think that's it. So I'm just going to go and see in the models if you need to change anything. So I'm going to do protected table names attributes. So now let's run the seed command and create the table and some example attributes. PHP artisan migrate hyphen seed. It's going to create the attributes table. Let's go in the database and check whether the table has been created. And looks like it has been created with some 10 dummy attributes. So I'm happy with that. The next step that we are going to do is to create the attribute values table and attribute values model. To do that, let's go and create the migration file and model to create the attribute values table. Make model attribute value hyphen all. That's going to create the attribute value. Just quickly going to set all the attributes in there. Table will be attribute values. Primary key is going to be ID, and protected fillable. Let's create the migration file first. I'm going to create database migrations attribute values. I'm going to add an attribute ID in here because attribute values are linked to an attribute. So these are attribute values, red, green, blue, and they are linked to an attribute. So I will need an attribute ID, table, unsigned big integer attribute ID, and I'm also going to need the attribute value. So it's going to be a string column. So it's going to be attribute value. And I'm going to say this attribute ID is a foreign key. And it references ID on the attributes table. So that's it. Next, I'm going to add these two columns to the fillable property. So attribute ID and attribute value needs to be added to the fillable property in here. So attribute ID and attribute value. Once that is done, I'm going to go into the factories and add some default, some example attribute values in there. So here, I want the attribute ID to be a random ID. It should be a random attribute ID. So attribute ID should be attribute in random order. And this should be first in ID, and attribute value should be a word. So, and let's go into the seeders, database seeder, and make this attribute value instead of attribute because I don't want to create any more attributes. Let's go and run that migration. And seed it. So that should have created the attribute values table. Let's go in the database and check if it has already created it. Yes, it has. So as you can see, attribute and attribute values table has been created, and it has also given a random attribute ID to each of the attribute values. The next step is to create a relationship between attributes and attribute values. Now, each attribute can have multiple attribute values, and attribute values belongs to attributes. So let's create that relationship. Let's open up the attribute model. And here, I'm going to do a public function. And this is public function attribute values. And that's going to return has many attribute value. So each attribute has many attribute values. So let's do the reverse of it. In attribute value, I'm going to go in public. I'm going to add the statement public function attribute, and then I'm going to say it belongs each attribute value belongs to an attribute. Let's quickly add the namespace here. This is a return type. It belongs to. So now we have got this relationship added in attribute and attribute values table. Let's open Tinker and see if it works. To open Tinker, PHP artisan Tinker is the command that's going to open the shell. Tinker. Let's check in the database. We've got an attribute here, so let's change this to color. And I'm going to change the attribute values as well. So attribute ID with ID 10. So let's change this to red, green, and blue. Now let's check whether the relationship is working. So attribute app models attribute where ID is 10, and I'm going to say first, get me the first attribute. Once that is done, it's going to give me the color attribute. Now I'm going to say attribute, and I'm going to go here in attribute, and the relationship is attribute values. So I'm going to copy it and paste it here, and I'm going to say get. So that is going to give me all the attribute values that are assigned to attribute ID 10. So it's going to give me 3 attribute values, red, green, blue, which is correct. Now, if we go to attribute values, let's check whether the inverse relationship is working. So attribute value, so I'm going to say app models attribute values where ID is, let's grab a attribute value in there. So I'm going to choose an attribute value of 2, and get me the first attribute value. Attribute value, not values. Once we have that attribute value, I can just copy this and get the attribute. That should do it. There you go. So attribute value 2 has red attribute value. It's having a attribute of ID 10, which is color. So that proves that our relationship is working, both the attribute relationship and the inverse of it, that's the attribute value relationship.